morning. I think I'm live. Good morning, tribe, my tribe. I'm not sure who's here yet. I think it's just gone 11 o'clock and I'm now live. So welcome to my tribe who's here. Anybody who's listening, today I'm going to be talking about grief, and it's a heavy topic. When I mentioned it to a friend yesterday, she was saying to me, so what are you going to talk about on your Facebook Live? And I said, grief. And she said, wow, that sounds like fun. And I thought, probably a lot of you are going to think this is not this is not something we often want to talk about, a loss, grief, grieving, sorrow. And having had a loss recently myself, I'm going to be talking about that because I always say you teach from the life you live, and I've lived through grief in the last week with the loss of my cat Charlie. I continue to feel the loss of him, and it was it's been such a beautiful and loving experience versus previously when I've dealt with the grief. The grief, first of all, of losing my mum at the age of 26, then my father, both two very different experiences. The grief of a relationship that didn't work while I was pregnant. There's so many different ways that we grieve. The loss of a job, the loss of our income. There's so much grief. In the last year, people that I've loved, that I've lost through COVID, many of us have had to deal with grief. And then as part of Tribe Sober, we also, when we grieve the loss of a relationship, we grieve the loss of our relationship with alcohol. And I feel so blessed that when I started my coaching practitioner training, I listened to an interview with a grief coach called Krista St. Germain. And I remember her saying that grief doesn't really have stages. It's not the same as Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages, which are more about death and dying, and often are used as part of the grieving process. According to Krista, Elizabeth herself said that she often wants to just clarify that she wrote the book about death and dying, which is quite different to grieving. And so I'll just share with you my experiences applying some of the concepts from Krista, and getting new understanding. And I'm going to sort of share 5 or 6 stages that I've experienced that I can see with you, and I'm going to intersperse it with some neuroscience, because I found that the neuroscience and Stacey Danford and Loretta Breining's beautiful explanations of how our brain works it's a beautiful way to just combine it. And I often talk about how our thoughts create our feelings drive our actions, and then we create our results from that, not our circumstances. So circumstances are facts. It's something that we can prove. I can prove that Charlie died. Everything else about that are my thoughts. And that is where our agency comes from. And when we understand that, when I understood the difference between the brain and the mind, the brain being our hardware, that's where our amygdala sits, that's where our hippocampus is, that's where our limbic system sits, that's where all the mechanics are. But what drives the brain is our mind, our thoughts. And that's where mindset work can be so powerful. But at the same time, our thoughts always link with a feeling. And what they tell us is that what we think, we link. So we link it with an emotion, and the more we think and feel the emotion, the more we wire that neural pathway. So that's just a little bit of background that I wanted to bring in, and some and why I'm going to bring in the neuroscience and how important it is to learn what we can create with our thoughts in grief can either support us or it can destroy us. And it all has to do with how we think about it. So when I had to make the decision last week, Friday, together with a vet and my husband and my son, we all absolutely loved Charlie. Charlie was our cat that had been with us for 10 years. The story I kept telling everybody about Charlie was at a time where I was trying to manifest wealth and a new career and abundance in my life, I managed to manifest a cat. And that's how he came into our life. And he hasn't been well for the last 2 years. And consequently, last week Friday, he was really not well. And we made the decision that we were going to euthanize him. And my husband not being here, I went to the vet, and Charlie was there, and it was very traumatic. It was more traumatic than I had expected. I just felt absolutely destroyed. I felt intense despair. I felt this hole within my whole being. And what was so powerful for me, that after that experience, I'd had a coaching session scheduled. And I'm part of Self-Coaching Scholars, which is a beautiful, I'm so grateful that I'm able to afford it and be part of it. But part of the learning and part of what they offer on a monthly basis is weekly coaching, 20-minute coaching sessions. And I always book my coaching in advance. So it was in my diary last week, Friday. And at first I thought I'm going to cancel it because I'm a mess. I'm a total mess. And I remember how often my clients will go on a binge and then they'll cancel their coaching session, and you think, okay, it's better if I coach and I'm in a better state of mind, I'm more positive. But that's exactly the time that you want to get coaching. So I didn't cancel it, and it's beautiful. And every Friday we get a different coach, so I never quite know who's going to show up. And there was this beautiful young woman called Stacy, and I just said to her, I just lost my cat. And I started to cry, and I started to cry, and I started to weep, and I started to howl, and she just held that space for me. And I just understood afterwards, now reflecting back, how for 20 minutes I could just be there and cry, and she guided me through the allowing of that emotion within me. Where did I feel it? Where was the sobbing? I felt my throat was like on fire, and I could just allow these waves to come through me. And after that I felt much lighter. I still felt the heaviness. But when you are going through a loss, it is one of the things that is really important for me in thinking back, is to cry and to allow yourself, and maybe you're not even going to cry, but really allow yourself to drop into the emotion, the feeling of what is it that I'm experiencing right now. It was cathartic, it was beautiful, and it took me completely out of my mind. But of course then what happened is I started beating myself up. And I started saying to myself, maybe it was too soon. Maybe we could have done something different. We should have taken him 2 years ago for this operation. And if he'd had that operation then, he would still be with us. And I was judging and berating myself. And I was talking to a friend, and she was saying to me, which vet did you take him to? Oh, and I've heard so many bad stories about that vet. And I just got it afterwards now, and when reflecting back on it, the anger of it, where my thoughts and my judgments and commiserating with my friend about it was the vet. So we're always wanting to blame. So often when we have a loss, we're wanting to blame. We point fingers, and that is where our suffering comes from. The third part I want to say, when you are there, get support. get a therapist or a coach, it's so important to keep telling the story of what was going on, the trauma of Charlie. I had the opportunity again yesterday with another coaching session, and this time with a beautiful coach called Anik, to just talk through the story again, and the mindset and the thoughts and what actually happened in the last week. So we had Stacey at the Zoom cafe on Saturday, and I asked her the question, so because I somehow believe that with grief, how do you grieve? Well, how do you even express it? I was crying, I was miserable, I was beating myself up. Can we allow ourselves still to be happy? Why is it so often that we think that we need to hold ourselves accountable and grieve this person and beat ourselves up the same way that we do when we have a slip, or when we ditch the drink, or when we lose a job, or we lose a relationship? If only that person could love us more. Why can't I drink like everybody else? And we're always pointing the fingers, and we're not getting in happy chemicals. We're getting in the cortisol, the stress of it. And I just realized that there's a difference between grief and suffering. So on Sunday I was moping around again. So one of the things that I go to when I used to back early on drink excessively, and now I had this. Now it's more food, and I had this desire for pizza and chocolates. And then I was just feeling so low on Sunday that I was like, shopping. I think I should just go to the shops and buy myself something new. That'll make me feel better. And I just caught it, and I'm like, you're buffering. You're wanting to buffer away the feelings again. And I again just felt this absolute loss of Charlie. And I decided to do the pencil trick from Stacey. I thought, okay, let me see if this really works. And let me just put in my pencil and go and walk around my house with like, and I was doing that when my son arrived. And he was like, Mom, what on earth is going on with you now? And I'm like, oh, I'm generating happy chemicals. Oh. And he started to laugh. And then I started to laugh. And we were like both laughing. And then we started to talk about Charlie and our cat and how funny he was. And do you remember how he used to hide behind the pillar and how he never knew he could jump? And we started telling ourselves these beautiful stories, these beautiful memories of Charlie. And it was an amazing shift of celebrating and happiness, even in the loss of him. And I realized it was just the way I thought and felt. And Stacey was saying to us, if you think it, you link it. Neurons that fire together and wire together. So, and I got it that this is why there is no timeline on grief and how we grieve. Because when we're thinking the same thoughts and we're associating the same feelings with the same thought, we're wiring and firing that together over and over. And if we're wiring and we're firing together the whole time, our beating up of ourselves about it, our anger, our despair, and the thoughts that are not really serving us, then it's going to take much longer to get over the grief and to let go of a relationship, even with alcohol. If you're continually thinking the thought of, I wish I could drink, and why can't I drink, and feeling the deprivation of it, and you keep wiring and firing that, that's why willpower doesn't work. Eventually, you're going to go and drink. And eventually, I was going to beat myself up again if I wasn't aware of what I was thinking and feeling. So get support and talk. And the support that really is helpful is a therapist or a coach. So a therapist is really where you can talk and tell your story, and a coach as well. But coaching is going to look more at what are the thoughts and the feelings that you're linking here, and how is that serving you. And what I discovered again yesterday in my coaching session is that the flip side of grief is love. So the loss that we feel, the absolute pain that I was in, was because I loved him so. And the more we love, the more we're going to be going to have that sorrow and grief when we lose the person or the thing or the job, whatever. It's always about love. Which is why I say, how can this be an opportunity when we're dealing with grief? How can this be an opportunity to love ourselves more versus beating ourselves up and destroying ourselves? How can this be an opportunity for us to celebrate alive? Get clear on our thinking patterns, our thinking and feeling patterns. And the way to really do that is when we get support from a coach or a therapist. And the fourth step that is quite, that I also found, especially when we lose somebody really close to us, is that we need to change our identity. It's an identity shift. It was an identity shift within my home because he was no longer physically there. He was no longer physically present. And the whole atmosphere in the home has changed. So there's a whole identity shift. When we lose a job or we lose a relationship or a marriage or we no longer have alcohol as a go-to, we've ditched our relationship with alcohol, we need to have an identity shift. And Brooke Castillo talks about how this can be an opportunity to have an identity power grab. And I thought about that, okay, an identity power grab. So I remembered when I gave up alcohol that I decided I needed an identity. I needed to find out what does a woman who doesn't drink think like, feel like, how does she behave, how does she show up when she goes into a restaurant, when she goes to a party, or how does she show up when she gets home? What does she do? And I took on a new identity, an identity of somebody who chooses not to drink alcohol, who prefers not to drink. And I started thinking those thoughts. So if you are here today and you're really struggling with your identity without alcohol, use this as an opportunity for an identity power grab. Think about the superpower, who you are. This is an opportunity for a new identity. Write to yourself how you want to show up. What does the best version of yourself look like? So what does the best version of myself look like, even though the Charlie is no longer with me? The best version of myself is that he's gone, but I can still have a relationship with him. I can still speak to him. I can still think about him. I can celebrate him. I can grieve him and I can celebrate him. Because my feelings and my love for him, I created them in my thoughts. So I can use those same thoughts that I created the relationship with Charlie, the same thoughts that I created the relationship with whatever is important to me and that I love. I can use those thoughts and to celebrate rather than to feel suffering and beating myself up. It's such an important distinction that I got again, that there's something very different about when we grieve versus when we suffer. Grieving is the missing, it's the feeling, it's the emotion, it's something that we can let go of in our body. But the suffering comes from our judgments, our anger, the way we beat ourselves up, our shoulding, when we should all over ourselves. And we can still be happy and still have a baseline of joy and grieve. Some way we've bought into this concept that grieving, what I did, that when we grieve we need to wear black, we need to lie in bed for days, we need to just cry, we need to just wallow, we need to, how does it even look? And here's the thing, it's different for all of us. We get to choose even how we want to grieve. And however feels good for you and right for you is the right way to grieve. There aren't really any stages. They're just little tools that you can, they aren't little, they're big tools that you can bring in to really support yourself through the process. My coach yesterday said to me, the question that I want you to ask yourself and journal around, Lynette, is, how can I support myself? What do I need from myself now to support myself more? And what came up was that I felt I didn't have a proper goodbye with Charlie. I had this story and this idea in my head that it was going to be beautiful and peaceful, that I was going to go with him, be with him at the vet, and that he was going to go peacefully and purr, and I was going to stroke him as he left this world. And when I got there, the vet had so heavily sedated him that he was no longer there for me. It was just this, and I grieved with that I was like, this was much harder because, first of all, I made the decision, and now he's not even in this body, and even though I'm with him, he's not here. And then my coach said to me again, but he was there, he's in your thoughts, he's in your thinking. And she talked to me about a completion, and a completion being a letter to Charlie. I could write a goodbye letter to Charlie. I could write a letter to Charlie that I wanted to say to him and wanted him to be with, and how I remember him and how I celebrate him. And I just thought to myself, that's really so amazing, because I immediately got it. I can write a letter to Charlie. So I'm going to take time this weekend and I'm going to write the letter. And again, I was just thinking about our Tribe Sober, and this beautiful program and workshop that Janet has put together for us. That our completion is really when we write our goodbye letter. So, and I never really linked that all together. So writing a goodbye letter to alcohol, writing a goodbye letter, or even just writing a letter to the person we've lost, the thing we've lost, and is cathartic. So those are some of my thoughts I wanted to share with you. I hope you found them helpful, and and that you can maybe share. Let me see who's here today. Let me just go, Roz. Good morning, Roz. You in sunny Spain, and Marie-Louise. I know many of you have dealt with loss and pain, and if you're still stuck in the absolute suffering of it, are you beating yourself up? Are you shoulding? Are you really just allowing and loving yourself through the process, asking yourself, what is it that I need, and how can I support myself? Hi Flick and Lynn. Hi Roman. It's Claudia in Stockholm. Mandy, so good to see you here. Diane. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Bernadette. Good morning, Anik. Our bond with pets is so strong, and it's so true, because I really believe that our pets, my pets, my Charlie, have been taught me how to love unconditionally. They really teach us how to love. And it is sad when we say goodbye. Yeah. Oh, we're all in tears now. Yes, Flick, it is so healing and important to cry. Oh, good morning, Susan. And Roman is saying, yeah, grief is the price we pay for love. Yes, it's so, so true. So, yeah, and it's a price that I'm willing to pay over and over again, for having loved, for having had the opportunity to truly love. Marie-Louise says, people told me I need to choose to stop grieving. And again, I just want to offer you, Marie-Louise, it's your choice. You don't need to choose anything. The way that we grieve and the way that we let grief move through us, it's all very individual. And do we ever stop grieving? I don't think so. I think there'll be, whenever I think of Charlie, or I think of my mother, and I think of my father, and close friends that I've lost, there's always grief. There's the emotion of the loss, but there's also and on the other side, there's also the celebration of them, the remembering of them, that we can still talk to them, that they're still here with us in our minds, where we created our love and our feelings for them. So for me, grieving is part of life. It's part of the circle of life. And I don't know if we ever really stop grieving, and that it's okay. It's just not to make ourselves suffer from it, not to beat ourselves up. I think that for me, that has been the beautiful awareness that I got, that grieving is such a beautiful, pure and clean emotion. But when we bring in the guilt and the anger, and we want to just, and we're shooting ourselves and we're blaming ourselves, that's when it becomes murky and suffering and yucky. So grief is beautiful and clean like love. It's just the flip side, and we can't escape it. It's part of life. It's part of our human expression. It's part of our human condition, that we are always going to, there's always going to be love, there's always going to be grief, there's going to be joy, there's going to be sadness, all of those emotions. So thank you so much for being here, everybody, for bearing with me, for hearing my story, and for allowing me just to share some of my insights that I had for myself about grief. And I hope you found it helpful. And I look forward to seeing many of you later at the Zoom Cafe, and I wish you a beautiful Saturday.